You're not invited, my granddaughter texted. Exactly 7 days later, I hit the lottery jackpot. It was a message that shattered my heart, coming from the one person I thought would never hurt me, my own granddaughter. The words "you're not invited" echoed in my mind for days, filling me with sadness and confusion. I had always done my best to love and support her, but somehow, I was left out of the most important event of her life. As I sat in my small, quiet home, feeling the sting of rejection, I never imagined that life would throw me a curveball. 7 days later, I was sitting in a local diner, sipping coffee when I scratched off the lottery ticket I had bought on a whim. And just like that, my world changed. But despite the wealth, the loneliness remained. Could money heal the wound my granddaughter had left in my heart? It was a typical morning, the kind where the world outside still seemed to sleep, wrapped in the quiet fog of early dawn. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon, casting a soft, golden glow through the small window in my kitchen. I sat at the old wooden table, the one I had inherited from my mother, its surface worn and scratched from years of use. The house, though small, was filled with memories, some happy, some bittersweet, but it was my home, my sanctuary. A place where I had spent most of my life, raising children, watching them grow, and later helping with grandchildren. I had never imagined it would be the place where I would feel so isolated, so forgotten. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth doing little to ease the chill that had settled in my chest. It wasn't the cold of winter, it was the cold of heartbreak. I glanced down at my phone, the bright screen flashing a notification that made my heart skip a beat. The message was from my granddaughter, Emma. "You're not invited." Those words hit me like a slap across the face. I stared at the screen, unable to comprehend what I was reading. Emma had been my everything. From the moment she was born, I had promised myself that I would always be there for her. As she grew, I watched her become this bright, talented young woman, full of promise and ambition. I had always been proud of her. We shared a bond, one I believed was unbreakable. Yet here I was, sitting in my kitchen, staring at a message that seemed to shatter everything. My own granddaughter, someone I had poured my love into for years, had just told me that I was not important enough to be part of her life's biggest event. I read the message again, hoping it would somehow make more sense the second time around, but it didn't. It felt like my chest was caving in, the weight of rejection pressing down on me, suffocating me. I couldn't think straight. My mind raced in circles, replaying every moment I had spent with her. Had I done something wrong? Had I failed her in some way? My thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and hurt. I had always tried to be there for Emma, offering advice when she needed it, supporting her when she faltered, and celebrating her successes. I had thought our relationship was solid, built on mutual love and respect. How could she do this to me? How could she leave me out of her wedding? I wanted to scream, to throw my phone across the room, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I felt a strange numbness wash over me, a quiet emptiness that seemed to fill every corner of my heart. The tears I had been holding back finally began to fall, but even they seemed to have no release, no comfort. I sat there, alone in the silence, with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat to keep me company. The house felt smaller now, the walls closing in around me. I tried to focus on the mundane details, how the dishes needed to be washed, how the dust had accumulated on the shelves, but nothing seemed to matter. My thoughts kept returning to Emma, to the painful finality of those words. "You're not invited." The hurt stung like a fresh wound, and I couldn't seem to escape it. I tried to think of when it all went wrong. Had there been a moment I missed, a warning sign that I ignored? Maybe it was the time I had tried to offer some advice about her fiancé, Derek. I hadn't been thrilled about their relationship, but I had never voiced my concerns to her. I knew better than to interfere. Maybe that was the mistake. Maybe she had seen my silence as a judgment, a disapproval of the choices she was making. But that wasn't it. I just wanted the best for her, and perhaps I had gone about it all wrong. The thoughts spiraled in my mind, each one more painful than the last. I had been the matriarch of our family, the one who always had an answer, always had a way to bring people together. But now, It felt like I was nothing. Like I had been discarded, my place in the family no longer needed. I couldn't bear the thought of not being there on her wedding day. I had imagined being in the front row, watching her walk down the aisle, beaming with pride and love. I had imagined offering her a hug, telling her how beautiful she looked, how proud I was of her. But now, that dream seemed so distant, so impossible. As the hours passed, the day dragged on. The house grew colder, the silence more oppressive. I tried to distract myself by going through old photo albums, looking at pictures of Emma as a child. There she was, in my arms, so small and fragile. There she was, at her first birthday party, smiling so brightly. I smiled through my tears as I traced the lines of her face in the photos, but it only made the ache in my heart more pronounced. How could this have happened? How could I have gone from being her confidante, her grandmother, to someone who didn't even make the guest list for her wedding? I found myself walking around the house aimlessly, my mind too foggy to concentrate on anything for long. The walls seemed to close in around me, the weight of rejection pressing on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer needed, that I had outlived my usefulness. I tried to tell myself that it didn't matter, that there were other things in life, other joys to be had. But the truth was, I didn't know how to fill the void left by Emma's absence. She had been such a big part of my life, and without her, the world felt emptier. The quiet was deafening, and I found myself missing her more than I had ever thought possible. The loneliness crept in, wrapping its cold fingers around my heart. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that I decided to leave the house. The walls were too much, the silence unbearable. I needed to get out, to clear my head. I grabbed my coat, a worn, faded piece that had seen better days, and stepped outside into the chilly air. I didn't have a destination in mind, just the need to be away from the emptiness of my home. The streets were quiet, the sun dipping lower in the sky, casting long shadows on the pavement. I wandered aimlessly, my mind still fixated on Emma and her cruel message. I ended up at the local diner, a place I had frequented for years. It was a modest establishment, the kind of place that served simple meals and always had a fresh pot of coffee brewing. I took a seat by the window, my back to the rest of the diner, and ordered a cup of coffee. The warm, dark liquid was comforting, a small solace in a world that felt like it was falling apart. I stirred the coffee absent-mindedly, trying to find some peace, but my mind kept drifting back to Emma. As I sat there, nursing my coffee, I glanced down at the small lottery ticket I had bought on a whim earlier that morning. I had almost forgotten about it, not really thinking it would amount to anything. But there it was, sitting on the table in front of me, a small sliver of hope in an otherwise bleak day. I picked it up, scratching off the numbers with a coin, more out of boredom than expectation. And then, I froze. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The numbers matched. My hands trembled as I looked at the ticket again, my heart racing. I had won. I had actually won the lottery. I sat there in disbelief, staring at the ticket as if it might disappear if I looked away for too long. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift, replaced by a strange sense of disbelief. I had just won millions of dollars, a sum that could change my life in ways I had never imagined. But even as the excitement began to build, there was something else. A hollow feeling inside me, one that no amount of money could fill. My heart still ached, still carried the sting of Emma's rejection. The wealth felt like a distant echo, a brief distraction from the deeper pain that still lingered in my chest. Money could buy me things, comfort, security, even luxury, but could it heal the wound that my granddaughter had inflicted? Could it fill the emptiness left by her absence? As the reality of my win began to settle in, I couldn't help but wonder if this was some kind of cruel twist of fate. Was this the universe's way of making up for the pain I had just endured? Was this money supposed to somehow fix the emotional void that Emma's rejection had left behind? I didn't know. But what I did know was that I had no idea how to move forward. The lottery win, though life-changing, didn't feel like the answer to my pain. I sat there, staring at the ticket, lost in thought, wondering if I could ever find the peace I needed. The days following my unexpected lottery win were a blur, a strange juxtaposition of excitement and sorrow. I was suddenly thrust into a world of possibilities, a world I had never imagined for myself. The money, while overwhelming, brought with it a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. For the first time in years, I could afford luxuries I had once only dreamed about. I could buy a new car, fix up my house, and even take a vacation to a place where the sun never seemed to set. The possibilities were endless, but none of it could fill the hole in my heart. I spent the first few days in a state of shock, my mind oscillating between the disbelief of my newfound wealth and the heaviness of my granddaughter's rejection. Despite the whirlwind of phone calls, congratulatory messages, and offers of financial advice, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had won the lottery, but I had lost something far more precious, the love of my family, particularly Emma, my granddaughter. The loneliness was crushing. Every time the phone rang, I hoped it would be Emma, calling to apologize, to explain why she had excluded me from her wedding. But each time, it wasn't her. It was some distant relative, a friend, or a stranger offering their congratulations. I felt as though I were being pulled in two different directions, on one hand, the excitement of the lottery win, and on the other, the aching void left by Emma's absence. I found myself retreating more and more into myself. The house, which had once felt like a home, now seemed cold and empty. The walls, adorned with family photos, seemed to mock me. I would catch glimpses of myself in the reflection of the glass frames, a woman who had been betrayed by the one person she loved most. I had given so much of myself to Emma, and in return, I had been cast aside. I tried to distract myself. I hired a lawyer to manage the lottery winnings, ensuring that everything was handled properly. I knew the money could change everything for me, but I wasn't sure how to change with it. I wasn't the kind of person who flaunted wealth or sought the attention that came with it. But even as I tried to make the best of it, I couldn't help but feel that I was drifting further away from what truly mattered, my family, my sense of belonging. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that money, no matter how much it could offer, would never replace the emotional connections I had once held so dear. I wanted to call Emma, to hear her voice, to beg her to reconsider, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The pain of rejection was still too raw. I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us, how to fix what had been broken. The tension within me grew as the days passed. I became irritable, restless, snapping at anyone who tried to talk to me. It wasn't fair to them. I knew that. But the resentment toward Emma, the feeling of betrayal, consumed me. I kept wondering what had gone wrong. Was it something I had said or done? Had I made a mistake somewhere along the way? I replayed every conversation, every moment spent with her, searching for a clue that could explain her decision. But there was nothing. The message had come out of nowhere, leaving me feeling blindsided and confused. It wasn't just the rejection that hurt, it was the silence that followed. The cold distance between us felt insurmountable, as though I had been cast adrift in a sea of hurt and loneliness. And even as I tried to distract myself with shopping sprees, home improvements, and social outings, the truth lingered beneath the surface. I was rich, yes, but I was also alone. On the third day after winning the lottery, I found myself standing in front of a bank, about to sign a contract that would secure my financial future for the rest of my life. The bank manager, a kind woman in her 40s, smiled at me, handing me the paperwork. She was excited for me, as were so many others, but I couldn't bring myself to feel the same way. Sure, the money would change things, but it couldn't change the past. It couldn't change the fact that Emma had pushed me out of her life, and that I had no idea why. I signed the papers without much thought, my mind wandering to darker places. I thought about the days when Emma and I had been inseparable, when she would come to my house, sit on the couch with me, and tell me about her day. Those memories felt like a distant dream. Now, as if they belonged to someone else. I couldn't even remember the last time we had shared a genuine conversation, a moment of connection. When I left the bank, I decided to take a walk through the park. The air was crisp, and the leaves crunched beneath my feet as I made my way along the path. It was a peaceful place, a place where I used to take Emma when she was younger. I could almost hear her laughter echoing through the trees. I stopped for a moment, closing my eyes, allowing myself to imagine that things were different, that Emma was still in my life, that she hadn't shut me out. But as soon as I opened my eyes, the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. I was standing there alone, just like I had been for the past few days. The world seemed to be moving on without me, and I had no idea how to stop it. The contrast between my material success and emotional emptiness was stark. I could buy anything I wanted, but I couldn't buy back my granddaughter's love. I couldn't buy back the closeness we once shared. I walked aimlessly for hours, my mind racing, until the sun began to set. The sky was a canvas of deep oranges and purples, the light fading into dusk. I didn't want to go back home, didn't want to face the emptiness that awaited me there. But eventually, my feet led me back to the house. The door creaked as I opened it, and the familiar smell of dust and silence filled my nostrils. As I sat down in my chair, the phone rang again. This time, my heart skipped a beat, but when I checked the screen, it wasn't Emma. It was my sister, Grace, calling to check in. She was excited about the lottery win, but even her enthusiasm couldn't shake the sadness that had settled in my heart. We talked briefly, but it was clear that something was missing. The conversation felt hollow, like we were both going through the motions, pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. By the time we hung up, I realized something. Money could change my circumstances, but it couldn't change the fundamental issue I was grappling with, the aching sense of rejection, the feeling of being left behind. And no matter how much I tried to distract myself with new possessions, new experiences, or even new people, the truth remained, I couldn't buy back the one thing that mattered the most to me. The days after my lottery win bled into each other, each one indistinguishable from the last. The money, which should have been a blessing, felt more like a burden. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate it, I did, but I couldn't shake the growing realization that it wasn't the answer to the emptiness inside me. I kept trying to convince myself that it would bring the joy and fulfillment I was so desperately seeking. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the loneliness only seemed to intensify. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that could be assuaged by a new car, a new house, or even a lavish vacation. No, this was a deep, aching loneliness that stemmed from the absence of someone I loved dearly. Emma. She had been a constant in my life for so long, and now, it felt like a gaping hole had been ripped open in my heart. The hurt from her message, "You're not invited," lingered like an open wound. I tried to pretend it didn't matter, that I could move on from it, but I couldn't. The more I tried to bury the pain, the more it bubbled to the surface, threatening to consume me. I couldn't escape the feeling of being rejected, discarded, unimportant. My own granddaughter, the one I had loved and raised, had cast me aside, and no amount of money or material possessions could change that. I spent countless hours reflecting on what had happened. What had led to this? What had I done wrong? I tried to think back to the last time Emma and I had shared a moment of connection, but the memory seemed distant, out of reach. I had been there for her when she needed me, always offering a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on. I had supported her decisions, even when I didn't always agree with them. But now, in the face of her rejection, I was left with nothing but the echo of her words and the hollow feeling that accompanied them. The truth was, I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to repair the rift between us. Every time I thought about reaching out to her, about picking up the phone and calling her, I hesitated. I was scared. Scared that she would reject me again, scared that I would be too much of a burden, that I had somehow become irrelevant in her life. I had been part of her world for so long, but now I was just a spectator, watching from the sidelines as her life continued without me. The situation became even more complicated when I realized that my own family, my friends, and even strangers were treating me differently now that I was suddenly wealthy. There were those who showered me with attention, offering advice on how to invest my winnings or how to use the money to improve my life. While I appreciated their concern, it all felt superficial. The more I interacted with them, the more I realized how hollow their gestures were. They were enamored with my wealth, but no one seemed to care about the real pain I was experiencing. No one asked about my emotional state, about how I was feeling, about the hole that Emma's rejection had left in my heart. Even Grace, my sister, who had always been a rock for me, seemed preoccupied with my newfound wealth. When I spoke to her, she was excited about the possibilities that the lottery win had opened up for me. She suggested that I take a vacation, go on a cruise, maybe buy a new car or remodel my home. I knew she meant well, but her words only reminded me of how disconnected I felt from the people around me. Everyone was so focused on the money, on what I could buy and what I could do, but no one seemed to understand that the one thing I truly wanted, Emma's love and forgiveness, wasn't something that could be purchased with money. One evening, as I sat alone in my living room, staring at the check for my lottery winnings that had come in the mail, I was struck by a painful realization: I was becoming a different person. The money, which should have been a blessing, was slowly transforming me into someone I didn't recognize. I was no longer the person who had been content with simple pleasures, the quiet moments spent with family, the joy of a home filled with love. Now, I was fixated on the things that money could buy, on the luxuries that once seemed so far out of reach. I was beginning to crave validation from others, to seek approval from those who had once been strangers. I wasn't sure when it had started, but I could feel the shift within me. I couldn't help but think that maybe Emma had been right. Maybe, in her eyes, I had become irrelevant. Maybe she had seen something in me that I hadn't been able to see myself, that I was no longer the person she had once known, the person she had once trusted. I had spent so much of my life putting others first, trying to fix their problems and make their lives better, that I had lost sight of myself. I had neglected my own needs, my own emotions, in favor of everyone else's. And now, as I stood at the precipice of this new life, with all the wealth in the world at my fingertips, I realized that I had lost something far more valuable: the ability to connect with the people I loved, to be truly seen for who I was, not for what I had. As the days passed, I tried to distract myself with the practical matters of managing my newfound wealth. I met with financial advisors, discussed investment opportunities, and even entertained the idea of purchasing a house with a view of the ocean. But each time I made a decision, I couldn't escape the nagging thought that it didn't matter. The house, the car, the vacation, they were all just things. None of them could fill the emptiness inside me. None of them could bring Emma back into my life. The tension within me grew. I felt torn between the life I had always known and the one that was unfolding before me. I longed to reach out to Emma, to make amends, to ask her why she had excluded me from her wedding. But I was afraid. Afraid that she wouldn't want to hear from me, afraid that I had already lost her for good. And so, I remained silent, hoping that somehow, in time, things would get better. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't keep running from the truth. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. The emotional weight of Emma's rejection was too much to bear, and no amount of money could change that. The weeks dragged on, each day blending into the next. I had become increasingly disconnected from everything: my family, my friends, and even myself. The weight of my granddaughter's rejection hung over me like a dark cloud, one that I couldn't seem to escape. Despite the wealth that should have brought me comfort, I was still drowning in the emptiness of the situation. I found myself caught in a vicious cycle of distraction, trying to numb the pain with material possessions, but never truly finding peace. Every time I caught a glimpse of the money, or a shiny new purchase, it was a cruel reminder that I had no real connection with the people I cared about most. It wasn't until one cold evening, when I was sitting alone in my living room, that something inside me shifted. The house was quiet, the only sound coming from the ticking of the old clock on the wall. I had been staring at the same spot on the wall for what felt like hours, lost in my own thoughts, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Grace. She wanted to visit, to talk. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't sure if I was ready to face anyone, let alone have a deep conversation. But something told me that maybe, just maybe, I needed to let someone in. I agreed, telling her to come over in the evening. I spent the next few hours preparing, not physically, but emotionally. I had no idea what I would say, but I knew that I couldn't keep going like this. I had to confront my feelings, both the hurt and the anger that had been building inside me. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. Not when it clearly wasn't. When Grace arrived, her face lit up with that familiar warmth. She was always the one who made people feel at ease, who could walk into a room and instantly make you feel like everything would be all right. But I saw it in her eyes. She could tell something was off. The usual easy conversation between us was absent, replaced by a heavy silence that hung between us. She sat down across from me, her expression soft but concerned. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Her voice was calm, but I could tell she was worried. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say that everything was fine, that I was adjusting to the changes in my life. But the truth was, I wasn't fine. I was far from it. The emotions that I had kept buried for weeks, maybe even months, suddenly bubbled to the surface. I could feel the tears welling up in my eyes, but I fought them back. I wasn't sure if I was ready to share the full extent of my pain with her, or if I even had the words to explain what I was going through. "I don't know, Grace," I said quietly, my voice cracking with emotion. "I feel like I've lost everything. The money, it doesn't mean anything to me. It's like I've gained the world, but lost the only thing that truly mattered, Emma. And I don't know why. I've tried to understand, but I can't. I've been there for her entire life, and now, I'm nothing to her. She doesn't even want me at her wedding. What did I do wrong?" Grace didn't respond immediately. She sat there for a moment, absorbing my words. I could see the wheels turning in her head, as if she were trying to figure out how to best help me. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "Listen, I can't pretend to know exactly what Emma's thinking. But I do know one thing, you're not alone in this. You still have people who care about you. We care about you. And while I can't take away the pain of being rejected by someone you love, I can tell you that you're not defined by Emma's actions. You're still the same person you've always been. And maybe it's time to stop letting her choices dictate your happiness." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't the first time I had heard similar sentiments from others, but coming from Grace, they carried weight. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of something inside me. Was it hope? Was it the faintest glimmer of clarity? Maybe. But I wasn't sure if I could let myself believe it just yet. "You don't understand," I said softly, my voice breaking. "She's my granddaughter. I was there for her when no one else was. I loved her unconditionally. And now she doesn't even want me at one of the most important moments of her life. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know if I can." Grace reached across the table, placing a hand gently over mine. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "I can't fix it for you, but I do know this, you don't have to do it alone. And you don't have to carry the burden of this pain by yourself. It's okay to feel hurt. It's okay to cry, to let out all the emotions you've been holding in. But you don't have to let this define who you are. You're not just Emma's grandmother. You're a strong, loving person in your own right." Her words lingered in the air between us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of release. It wasn't a cure, and it didn't fix the hurt in my heart, but it was something. It was the beginning of something, maybe the start of healing. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to move forward. I sat in silence for a long time, reflecting on Grace's words. The weight of the situation still felt heavy, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe a little easier. Maybe I couldn't fix everything. Maybe I couldn't change Emma's feelings, or undo the hurt that had been caused. But I realized that I didn't have to let that define me. I could choose how to respond, how to move forward. As the evening wore on, Grace and I talked more, and though the conversation didn't solve everything, it did something far more important: it opened the door to healing. She promised that she would be there for me, that we could work through this together. And while I knew it wouldn't be easy, I also knew that I couldn't keep holding on to the anger and sadness. It was time to let go of the things I couldn't control and focus on what I could. By the time Grace left, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't fixed, but I wasn't broken either. I was somewhere in between, and that was okay. The journey toward healing wouldn't be a straight path, but I was willing to take the first step. As I closed the door behind her, I stood there for a moment, letting the quiet of the house settle around me. The lottery win, the wealth, the possessions, it all felt distant now. What really mattered was the people I loved, the relationships that needed mending, and the emotional growth I had yet to experience. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was starting to realize that there was more to life than money. There was more to me than the sum of my possessions. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a while, I felt like I could face it. Maybe the healing would come in time. Maybe it wouldn't. But I was ready to try. The weeks that followed the conversation with Grace were a strange mix of small victories and painful setbacks. I had begun to feel like I was emerging from a fog, but each step I took forward seemed to bring with it a new wave of uncertainty. The emotional weight of Emma's rejection still hung heavy over me, and no matter how much I tried to distract myself with my wealth, the pain never seemed to subside. There were days when I would catch myself feeling hopeful, imagining a future where Emma and I would reconcile, where the rift between us would be healed, and we could go back to the way things had been. But those moments were fleeting, and they always seemed to be followed by a deep, gnawing sense of despair. I wanted to believe that time would heal everything, but the truth was, I wasn't sure if I could ever fully heal from the hurt that had been caused. I had tried to reach out to Emma a few times, but each time I hesitated before hitting send. I wrote messages, apologies, explanations, heartfelt pleas for her to let me back into her life, but I never sent them. The fear of being rejected again was too much to bear. The thought of pouring my heart out to her, only to have it fall on deaf ears, terrified me. I knew I had to take the first step if I wanted things to change, but the emotional vulnerability that came with that step was paralyzing. One afternoon, as I sat in my favorite armchair, staring out the window at the fading sunlight, I couldn't help but think about the way things had been before. The years I had spent raising Emma, the bond we had shared, the way her eyes would light up when she saw me, it all felt like a distant memory now. It was as if that version of my life had been erased, replaced by this cold, empty reality where I was no longer needed. I had spent so much time giving to her, loving her, supporting her, but now it felt as though all of that had been for nothing. I sighed heavily, running a hand through my hair. The silence of the house was deafening. The phone sat on the table beside me, its screen glowing faintly in the dim light, but I couldn't bring myself to pick it up. I didn't know if I was ready to face the truth of what had happened, or if I was just too afraid to admit that there was a part of me that feared my granddaughter had moved on without me. It wasn't just Emma I had to worry about. There were other relationships in my life that had been strained in the wake of the lottery win. It seemed like the moment I became wealthy, people started treating me differently. Some friends were suddenly more eager to spend time with me, eager to offer their advice on how I should manage my wealth, while others had become distant, unsure of how to relate to the new version of me. I couldn't blame them. I was still the same person, but the circumstances had changed. The world had started seeing me through the lens of my money, and it left me feeling like a stranger in my own life. Even Grace, my sister, whom I had always leaned on for support, seemed a little distant. She was still kind, still loving, but there was a subtle shift in the way she treated me. I noticed it when she would come over to visit, how her eyes would linger on the new furniture, the new decor, the freshly painted walls of my house. It was as if she couldn't quite see me anymore. She saw the money, the wealth that had come with it, and though I knew she loved me, I couldn't help but feel like that part of me had been overshadowed by the material things that now defined my life. One evening, I decided to go for a walk in the park. The weather had turned warmer, and the flowers were starting to bloom, filling the air with a sweet fragrance. It was a peaceful place, one I had visited many times before. I used to bring Emma here when she was little, and we would sit on the bench near the pond, watching the ducks swim by. Those memories were still fresh in my mind, and they were some of the few things that brought me comfort in the midst of all this confusion. As I walked along the familiar path, I found myself thinking about the choices I had made throughout my life. I had always been the one who put family first, who sacrificed my own needs to take care of others. I had spent so many years living for everyone else that I had lost sight of who I was, of what I wanted. I had given so much of myself to Emma, to my family, that I had forgotten to take care of my own emotional well-being. I had become so consumed by the needs of others that I had neglected my own. And now, here I was, standing on the edge of a life that had completely changed. The lottery win had given me everything I had ever dreamed of: comfort, security, freedom, but it had also taken away something far more precious. It had taken away the connections that truly mattered. The people who had once been the center of my world, Emma, Grace, my friends, had started to drift away, and I was left with nothing but material wealth. It was as though the money had created a barrier between me and the people I loved. The park was quiet that evening, the only sounds coming from the birds in the trees and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. I stopped at the bench near the pond, taking a seat and staring out at the water. The ripples on the surface of the pond reflected the fading light, and for a moment, I felt a strange sense of calm. The world around me was so beautiful, so peaceful, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It was then that I realized something important. I had been so focused on what I had lost, my relationship with Emma, the way people saw me, that I had forgotten to appreciate what I still had. I still had Grace, I still had my health, and I still had the ability to make things right. I could still reach out to Emma, could still try to fix what had been broken. But the first step had to come from me. I had to stop letting fear dictate my actions. I had to be vulnerable, to open my heart and risk the possibility of being hurt again. The realization hit me like a wave, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. I didn't have to let my past mistakes define me, and I didn't have to let my wealth separate me from the people I loved. I could make a choice. I could choose to fight for the relationships that mattered most, to put in the work to repair the damage that had been done. I stood up from the bench, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew that it was time to stop hiding from the truth. I had to face the pain, face the uncertainty, and take the first step toward healing. It wasn't just about the money or the material things. It was about love, connection, and the bonds that truly made life worth living. As I walked back to my car, I made a promise to myself. I would reach out to Emma. I would tell her how much I loved her and how sorry I was for whatever had gone wrong. I couldn't change the past, but I could change the future. And maybe, just maybe, she would hear me. The decision to reach out to Emma wasn't easy. For days, I wrestled with the idea of sending her a message or calling her. The fear of being rejected again weighed heavily on me, but I knew that if I didn't take this step, the emotional distance between us would only grow. I had tried to bury my feelings with the distractions of wealth and possessions, but none of that could fill the hole left by her absence. I needed to hear her voice, needed to know if there was any chance of repairing what had been broken between us. I drafted several messages, each one more heartfelt than the last, but I kept deleting them. The words never seemed right. I wanted to express my love, my regret, and my deep sorrow over how things had turned out, but nothing felt like it would be enough. What if she didn't want to hear from me? What if she had already moved on? What if she was happier without me in her life? The uncertainty gnawed at me, and for a while, I pushed the idea of reaching out to the back of my mind. But the more I tried to avoid it, the more it consumed me. I couldn't keep living in this state of limbo, where the future seemed like a fog and the past seemed like an irreparable crack in the foundation of our relationship. I had to know whether there was still a chance, whether I could still make a difference in her life, or if it was truly too late. One evening, as I sat in my living room, staring at the phone in my hand, I felt a wave of frustration rise within me. It had been weeks since the wedding invitation incident, and yet, I was still no closer to understanding what had happened. The pain of being cast aside by someone I loved so deeply had become an all-consuming weight, and no amount of money, no material possession, could alleviate it. I thought back to the days when Emma and I would sit on the porch, talking for hours about life, her dreams, and her future. I had been there for every milestone, every triumph, and every failure, always ready to offer my support. And yet, now, I felt like a stranger in her life. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked to the window. The night was quiet, and the moon cast a soft glow on the empty street outside. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and made the decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't live in this state of uncertainty any longer. It was time to reach out to her. I grabbed the phone, my fingers trembling as I typed the message. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest, and in that moment, that was all I could give. I pressed send before I could change my mind. The message was simple but heartfelt. Emma, I know things have been difficult between us, and I regret that we've drifted apart. I want you to know that I love you deeply, and I'm truly sorry for whatever I may have done to hurt you. I miss you, and I would love to talk, if you're willing. Please know that I'm here, no matter what. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, waiting for her reply. Every second felt like an eternity, the tension building in my chest as I wondered if she would respond. What if she didn't? What if she had already moved on and didn't care about fixing things? I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing, but the anxiety felt suffocating. And then, finally, the notification popped up. A message from Emma. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, half expecting another rejection, another painful reminder of how far apart we had become. But as I read her words, I felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. I'm not sure what to say, Grandma. I've been so confused. I've been angry, and I've been hurt too, but I've also missed you. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to talk. Maybe we can figure this out, but it's going to take time. I sat there, staring at the message, my emotions a whirlwind of confusion and hope. Emma hadn't completely shut me out, but she wasn't ready to forgive me entirely either. The path forward was unclear, and I realized that it wouldn't be easy. There was a long road ahead, full of hard conversations and painful moments. But at least there was a glimmer of hope, a tiny spark of possibility. But as quickly as the hope arrived, it was tempered by something darker. The message opened old wounds that I hadn't fully processed. It made me realize that the pain of Emma's rejection wasn't just about the wedding. It was about everything we had gone through together, and the realization that I had failed her in some way. I wasn't just hurt by her exclusion from the wedding, I was hurt by the fact that she had stopped trusting me, stopped seeing me as someone important in her life. That, more than anything, was the real sting. I sat there for a long time, the phone resting on my lap, my thoughts racing. I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The conflict wasn't just about Emma and me, it was about the realization that, in my desperation to be loved and appreciated, I had neglected the most important thing of all, communication. I had failed to listen to Emma's needs, to understand her pain, and now, I was paying the price for it. The emotional fallout was starting to settle in. The guilt, the regret, the realization that I had not been the grandmother I wanted to be, all hit me at once. I had tried to be everything for Emma, but in doing so, I had neglected to truly see her, to understand her needs, her dreams, and her struggles. I had been so focused on my own desire for connection that I had missed the signs that she was pulling away. And now, that distance seemed insurmountable. As the days passed, the weight of my own mistakes became heavier. I spent hours thinking about our past, about the times when Emma had been a little girl, looking up at me with wide eyes, eager to share every part of her world with me. I remembered the laughter, the warmth, the bond that we had once shared. And then, I thought about how it had all changed. How she had grown up, become more independent, more distant. How, somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the person she could turn to, the person who understood her. It was a painful realization, but it was also the truth. The emotional fallout wasn't just about the wedding, it was about everything I had failed to see, the things I had overlooked in my own pursuit of love and connection. I had let my own insecurities and fears dictate my actions, and now, I was paying the price for it. But even as the weight of my mistakes threatened to crush me, I knew that I couldn't give up. I had made the first step by reaching out to Emma, and now, I had to keep moving forward. I had to prove to her, and to myself, that I was willing to change, to be the kind of grandmother she needed. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks along the way, but it was a fight worth having. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a chance to make things right. I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from my eyes, and set my phone down. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days following my message to Emma were a whirlwind of emotions, each one pulling me in a different direction. There was relief, yes, because I had reached out and she had responded. But there was also fear, and confusion, and uncertainty. Her message had been a glimmer of hope, but it wasn't the forgiveness I had been desperately seeking. It was a tentative step, a crack in the door, but the door wasn't open yet. I knew that the road to healing would not be smooth or easy. It would take time, patience, and, most importantly, it would require me to face parts of myself that I had long tried to ignore. I spent the next few days reflecting on my past actions and the things I had overlooked in my relationship with Emma. I had always thought of myself as a supportive grandmother, always ready to help, to give advice, to offer my love and wisdom. But what I had failed to see was that sometimes, love meant stepping back and listening, not just offering advice or filling the space with words. Emma had grown up, and she needed me to acknowledge her independence, to respect her choices, and to be there for her in a way that didn't feel overwhelming or suffocating. The truth was, I had never truly understood her as an adult. I had seen her through the lens of my own experiences, projecting my own fears and desires onto her. I had been so consumed by my own longing for connection that I hadn't given her the space she needed to grow into her own person. It wasn't intentional, but that didn't make it any less real. I had allowed my own insecurities to shape the way I interacted with her, and now, I was paying the price for it. I had always prided myself on being strong, on being the matriarch of the family, the one who held everything together. But in the wake of Emma's rejection, I realized that I had been holding on to an image of myself that no longer served me. I had been so focused on maintaining control and preserving my sense of self-worth that I had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable. I had forgotten that true strength came from allowing yourself to feel, to experience the full spectrum of emotions, and to be honest with yourself and with others. It was a hard lesson to learn, but it was one I needed to face if I ever hoped to heal. I knew that I had to change, that I had to let go of the rigid version of myself that had always been so quick to offer advice and solutions. I had to learn how to listen, to be patient, and to give Emma the space she needed to come to her own conclusions. It wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't going to be quick. But I was willing to try. For her. For me. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, my thoughts drifting to the past, I made a decision. I would reach out to Emma again, but this time, I would do it differently. I wouldn't push for answers, and I wouldn't demand an explanation. I would simply listen. I would give her the space to share her feelings without judgment or expectation. I knew that if I wanted to rebuild our relationship, I had to start by showing her that I respected her autonomy, that I trusted her to make her own decisions. I took out my phone, my fingers hovering over the screen as I prepared to send her another message. This time, there was no rush, no pressure. I wanted her to know that I was here for her, but I wasn't going to force anything. I typed carefully, choosing my words with intention. Emma, I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I realize now that I've made mistakes. I've always tried to help and support you, but I haven't always listened to you. I want to be here for you, but I know that means I need to respect your space and your choices. I'm not asking for anything from you right now, except that we can talk when you're ready. I love you, and I'm here whenever you want to share. I read the message over several times, making sure it was right. It was simple, but it felt honest. It felt like the kind of message Emma needed to hear from me, one that acknowledged my mistakes while also showing that I was willing to meet her where she was, without pushing her. When I hit send, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I had done all I could for now. The ball was in Emma's court, and I had to trust that, in time, we would find a way to reconnect. I knew that healing wasn't a linear process, and that there would be setbacks along the way. But I also knew that this was the first real step I had taken toward healing, not just with Emma, but with myself. The next few days passed in a haze. I found myself going through the motions of daily life, checking in with the financial advisors, handling the practicalities of my newfound wealth, and making decisions about the future, but my thoughts kept returning to Emma. I wondered when she would respond, what she would say, if anything. The uncertainty was difficult, but I had to remind myself that healing took time. I couldn't rush it, and I couldn't force it. During this time, I also spent more time reflecting on my own personal growth. I had spent so much of my life caring for others, putting their needs ahead of my own, that I had neglected to nurture my own sense of self-worth. I had become so enmeshed in my roles as a grandmother, a mother, a sister, that I had lost sight of who I was outside of those roles. The lottery win had thrown all of that into sharp relief. I had thought that wealth would solve everything, but in reality, it had exposed the areas of my life that I had neglected for years. It had forced me to confront my own vulnerability, my own fears, and my own weaknesses. In the weeks that followed, I began to take small steps toward reclaiming my own identity. I started taking up activities I had once enjoyed but had abandoned: reading, gardening, cooking. I reconnected with old friends, people who knew me before I became caught up in the whirlwind of family obligations and responsibilities. I began to rediscover parts of myself that had been buried beneath the weight of others' expectations. I wasn't sure where this journey would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. I wasn't defined by my wealth, and I wasn't defined by my mistakes. I was learning to embrace my imperfections, to accept that I wasn't perfect, and that I didn't need to be. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I would ever be able to repair my relationship with Emma, moments when I felt the loneliness creeping back in. But those moments were becoming fewer, and I was starting to realize that healing was a process, one that required patience, self-compassion, and a willingness to let go of the past. And then, one evening, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my tea, I saw a notification on my phone. A message from Emma. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, unsure of what I would find. But as I read her words, I felt a rush of emotions: relief, hope, and the faintest spark of excitement. "Grandma, I've been thinking a lot, and I think we need to talk. I'm ready to see you, to hear you. Let's start fresh." Tears welled up in my eyes as I read her message. It wasn't the resolution I had imagined, but it was a beginning. A new beginning. The anticipation of seeing Emma again was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her message had been a small spark of hope, a crack in the door that I had been desperately trying to open for weeks. I had spent the past few days preparing myself, mentally and emotionally, for this moment. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Our conversation would be difficult, raw, and possibly painful. But I also knew that it was necessary. If we were ever going to rebuild our relationship, we had to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the day of our meeting approached, I found myself battling a mix of excitement and fear. I had dreamed of this moment for so long, but now that it was finally here, I was unsure of what to expect. Would Emma be open to reconciliation? Would she still harbor anger or resentment toward me? The uncertainty was almost unbearable, but I tried to push it aside. I had made my peace with the fact that whatever happened, I was ready to face the consequences. I couldn't change the past, but I could change how I responded to it. The morning of our meeting, I found myself pacing around the house, unable to sit still. I had spent the entire morning getting ready, choosing the clothes I would wear, deciding on the perfect setting for our conversation. I wanted everything to be perfect, but I knew deep down that perfection was not what mattered. What mattered was honesty, vulnerability, and the willingness to truly listen to each other. I arrived at the cafe where we had agreed to meet early. It was a quiet place, far removed from the noise and distractions of the city. The kind of place where you could have a conversation without being interrupted, where the world seemed to slow down for a while. I chose a table by the window, watching the world go by as I waited for Emma to arrive. My heart was racing, and I could feel the tension in my chest. I wanted to reach out to her, to take her hand and tell her that everything would be okay, but I knew that I had to give her the space to approach this on her own terms. As I sat there, my mind wandered back to all the moments we had shared, her first steps, her first day of school, the times when we had laughed together, when we had shared our hopes and dreams. Those memories were bittersweet now, clouded by the pain of her rejection. I wished I could go back, fix the mistakes I had made, and rewrite the story of our relationship. But I couldn't. All I could do was move forward and hope that we could rebuild what had been broken. After what felt like an eternity, I saw her walking toward me. She looked different, more mature, and yet still so familiar. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a soft smile, though I could tell there was still some hesitation in her eyes. My heart ached as I saw her, the little girl I had once held in my arms, now grown and standing before me as an adult, someone I had almost lost. She hesitated for a moment when she reached the table, her eyes searching mine, as if unsure of how to begin. I stood up slowly, feeling a lump form in my throat. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment of truth. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, my voice choked with emotion. "I'm so glad you came." She sat down across from me, her hands fidgeting with the napkin on the table. There was an awkward silence between us, as if neither of us knew where to start. I could feel the weight of the past few weeks hanging in the air, and I knew we both had so much to say, but neither of us knew how to begin. Finally, Emma spoke. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice cracking. "I've been so angry, Grandma. Angry at you, angry at myself, angry at the situation. I pushed you away because I didn't know how to deal with everything that was going on in my life. But I've been thinking a lot lately, and I realize now that I hurt you, too. And I'm so sorry." I felt tears welling up in my eyes as she spoke. The pain, the hurt, the confusion that had clouded my heart for so long began to dissipate. She was acknowledging her feelings, her anger, but also her regret. She was reaching out to me, and that was all I had ever wanted. I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over hers. "Emma," I said softly, my voice filled with emotion, "I've hurt you too, and I'm sorry for that. I never meant to make you feel like you weren't enough, or like you had to carry the weight of everything on your shoulders. I tried to protect you, but I see now that I was smothering you. I wasn't listening to you, to your needs, to your independence. And for that, I'm deeply sorry." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, we just sat there in silence. It was as if the weight of everything that had happened was finally being released, and we were both allowing ourselves to feel the rawness of the moment. There was no more pretending, no more hiding behind our pride or our fears. We were facing each other, vulnerable and open, ready to begin the healing process. "I think I've been afraid of losing you, Grandma," Emma said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I see now that pushing you away wasn't the answer. I was trying to protect myself, but I've hurt you in the process. I don't want to lose you. I want to be close to you again, but I need to do this on my own terms." I nodded, understanding her need for space and independence. "I get that, Emma. I understand now that you need to find your own path. And I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to do this alone." The tension between us seemed to lift, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. We had spoken our truths, acknowledged our pain, and taken the first step toward rebuilding our relationship. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be more difficult conversations ahead, but for the first time, I felt like there was hope. Hope that we could repair the bond that had been broken, and hope that we could find our way back to each other. As the conversation continued, we talked about the past, about the mistakes, the misunderstandings, and the moments of love that had once defined our relationship. We laughed a little, cried a little, and shared our hopes for the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that, I realized, was what mattered most. By the time we finished our coffee and said our goodbyes, I felt a sense of closure. We had taken the first step toward healing, and though there was still much work to be done, I felt like we were on the right path. I hugged Emma tightly before she left, and as I watched her walk away, I felt a weight lift from my chest. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a chance to make things right. The weeks that followed my meeting with Emma were filled with quiet moments of reflection and gradual, yet significant, progress. There was no sudden shift, no dramatic change in the state of our relationship, but something had shifted within me, and I could feel the changes starting to ripple outward. I had learned that healing didn't happen in an instant. It didn't come with a dramatic moment or a sweeping gesture. No, it came in the small, daily steps that built upon each other. It came from the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit the mistakes that had been made, and to let go of the things I couldn't control. I spent the following days focusing on rebuilding not just my relationship with Emma, but my own sense of self. For so long, I had defined myself by my roles: grandmother, mother, sister, and by my ability to take care of others. I had built my identity around the need to be needed, but I had neglected the most important thing of all, my own emotional health. The lottery win, which had initially seemed like the solution to all my problems, had merely exposed how much I had neglected myself in my efforts to care for everyone else. It had shown me that no amount of money or material possessions could fill the emptiness inside me. The only way to truly heal was to reconnect with who I was, to rediscover my own worth, separate from the roles I played in others' lives. It was a slow process, but over time, I began to feel like myself again. I started to do the things I had put on hold for years, reading books I had always meant to get to, tending to my garden, cooking meals that I loved but had stopped making. These small acts of self-care weren't just distractions, they were ways of reconnecting with the person I had once been, before I had become so consumed by the needs of others. I was learning, at long last, how to take care of myself without guilt. And then, just as I was beginning to settle into this new rhythm, I received another message from Emma. It had been a few weeks since our last meeting, and I had been waiting anxiously for her to reach out again. She had said she needed time, that we needed space, but I wasn't sure how much time was enough. I had come to understand that I couldn't rush this process, that healing had to happen on her terms as well as mine. But the waiting, the uncertainty, was still difficult. The message was simple, but it made my heart race as I read it. Grandma, I've been thinking a lot. I don't know how to explain it, but I think I'm ready. Ready to spend more time with you, to really talk about everything. I miss you. The words, so simple and yet so powerful, brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't an apology, and it wasn't an immediate promise of reconciliation, but it was something I had been longing to hear, an acknowledgement of the space I had given her, an acknowledgement that she was ready to take the next step. I sat down at my kitchen table, the message still glowing on my phone screen, and allowed myself a moment to just feel. I felt the weight of the past months, the hurt, the confusion, the loneliness, but I also felt something else: hope. It wasn't the kind of hope that came from a perfect resolution, but the kind of hope that was grounded in the understanding that we were both on a journey, one that wasn't linear, one that would require effort and patience from both of us. But it was a journey I was willing to take. A journey toward healing, toward understanding, and toward reconnecting. I didn't respond to her message immediately. Instead, I took a deep breath and set the phone down. This time, it wasn't about rushing forward. It wasn't about forcing a conversation or demanding answers. It was about letting things unfold at their own pace, allowing the natural course of our relationship to guide us. Emma was ready, and that was enough. The next day, I found myself sitting at the same cafe where we had met weeks earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had only been a few weeks. This time, I wasn't filled with anxiety or fear. This time, I was filled with a quiet anticipation. I wasn't sure what our conversation would hold, but I knew that we were both in a different place than we had been before. We had both changed, in ways that were painful and difficult, but also in ways that were ultimately necessary. When Emma walked in, I immediately noticed the change in her. She wasn't the angry young woman who had rejected me months ago. She was still the same person, but there was a softness to her, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She looked at me with a mixture of hesitance and hope, as though she wasn't sure what to expect from me, but was willing to find out. I stood up to greet her, my heart swelling with a mixture of love and gratitude. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady despite the rush of emotions inside me. "Hi, Grandma," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm really glad to see you." We sat down together, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. There was no rush to fill the silence this time. The space between us felt different. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, but rather a space that was allowing us to settle into a new understanding of each other. "I've been thinking a lot," Emma began, breaking the silence. "About everything. About why I pushed you away, about the things I never said, about how I didn't want to hurt you. I think I was afraid. Afraid of losing my independence, afraid of being judged for the choices I was making. And I see now that I wasn't fair to you. You've always been there for me, and I took that for granted." Her words were like a balm to my heart. There was an openness in her voice, a willingness to be vulnerable, that I had longed to hear. I reached across the table and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I understand, Emma," I said softly. "I do. I wasn't perfect either. I made mistakes, too. I tried to protect you, but I didn't always listen to what you needed. I was afraid of losing you, of not being needed, and that made me do things that weren't helpful. But I'm here now, and I'm ready to listen. We can move forward, together." We sat in silence for a while, just holding hands, letting the weight of our words settle. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the end of our journey, but it was progress. We were finally at a point where we could truly understand each other, where the walls between us were starting to come down. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because we had taken the first real step toward healing. We weren't there yet, but we were closer than we had been before. The road ahead was still long, and there would be more challenges, but I knew that we would face them together. As we finished our conversation, we stood up and hugged each other tightly. It wasn't just a hug of comfort, but one of connection, a promise that we would keep trying, no matter how difficult it might be. The months that followed that pivotal conversation in the cafe were filled with small victories, setbacks, and moments of reflection. Healing, I realized, wasn't a straight line. It was messy, complicated, and unpredictable. But it was also beautiful, in its own way. The process of rebuilding my relationship with Emma, and even with myself, was something I would never have imagined possible just a few months ago. And yet, here I was, standing on the other side of all the pain, with a sense of hope and peace that had once seemed so elusive. The first few weeks after our heart-to-heart meeting were full of tentative steps. We spoke more often, texted occasionally, and even met up for coffee on a few more occasions. Each time, I felt like we were learning something new about each other, something raw and real that we hadn't shared before. We were starting to talk about the things that had been left unsaid for so long. Emma had shared her feelings of confusion, fear, and uncertainty about growing up, while I had expressed my own worries about not being needed anymore, about fearing I was losing my place in her life. We were learning to speak openly, without judgment, and that alone was a huge step toward healing. But what struck me the most in those early days was how much I had changed. I was no longer defined by my role as a grandmother or a matriarch of the family. I was no longer the person who always had the answers, the one who had to fix everyone's problems. No, now I was someone who could listen, someone who could acknowledge her own mistakes and learn from them. And that, more than anything, was what had made the difference in my relationship with Emma. I had become someone who wasn't afraid to be vulnerable, to admit that I didn't always have all the answers, and that it was okay to not be perfect. Gradually, our conversations deepened. We began to talk about the things that truly mattered, our hopes, our dreams, our fears. Emma started to share more of her life with me, the things she was passionate about, the struggles she faced in her relationship with Derek, and even her doubts about her career path. And I, in turn, began to open up about my own past, about the choices I had made, and about the things I had never had the courage to admit before. It was through these conversations that I realized how much we had both grown. We had both been hurt by the things we had said and done, but we were also learning to forgive ourselves and each other. I remember one evening in particular, sitting on the porch of my house, the sun setting behind the hills in the distance. Emma had come over to visit, and we had spent the afternoon talking about everything under the sun. There was a lightness in the air between us, a sense of understanding that hadn't been there before. We talked about everything, her upcoming wedding, her future plans, and even the times we had shared when she was little. There was a sense of peace in the conversation, a feeling that we had finally arrived at a place of mutual respect and love. As the evening drew to a close, I looked at Emma and realized how far we had come. The girl who had once rejected me, who had shut me out of her life, was now sitting beside me, sharing her life with me once more. It wasn't the same as it had been before, but it was something more important, something deeper, more meaningful. We had both learned the importance of giving each other space to grow, while still holding on to the love that had always been there, even when we couldn't see it. "Grandma," Emma said softly, her voice a little shaky, "I've been thinking about the wedding. I want you to be there. I know I pushed you away before, but I don't want you to feel like you're not important to me. You're a huge part of my life, and I want you to be there, to be part of this new chapter." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at her. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected her to invite me back into her life in such a profound way. I had always thought the pain would never go away, that the rift between us would be permanent. But here we were, sitting together, talking openly about the future, and she was offering me a place in it. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt so overwhelmed with emotion. For a moment, I couldn't speak, words failed me. I reached over and took her hand in mine. "I would love to be there, sweetheart. I would love nothing more. You've made me so proud, and I just want you to know that I'm here for you, always." She squeezed my hand gently, and we sat there in silence for a while, just soaking in the moment. The sun had almost set, casting a golden glow across the sky, and the world around us seemed to pause for just a moment. It was as if time itself had slowed down, allowing us to savor the moment of connection that we had so desperately needed. And as the evening drew to a close, Emma stood up to leave, but not before pulling me into a tight hug. It wasn't just any hug, it was a hug of understanding, of reconciliation, and of unconditional love. As I held her, I realized that, while we might never fully go back to the way things were, we had reached a new place. A place of healing, of growth, and of acceptance. The road to this moment had been long and painful, but it had been worth every step. As I watched Emma drive away, I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. I had learned so much through this journey, about love, forgiveness, and the importance of vulnerability. But most of all, I had learned that healing takes time. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen on anyone else's timeline. It happens when you're ready to face the truth, to embrace the pain, and to give yourself and others the grace to grow. In the months that followed, Emma and I continued to rebuild our relationship, one conversation at a time. There were still moments of tension, moments when the past seemed to creep back in, but they were becoming fewer and farther between. I could see the changes in both of us, and I knew that we were moving in the right direction. And as I stood there, watching the sun set behind the hills, I felt a deep sense of peace settle within me. The past had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. I was no longer the person I had been when I first received Emma's rejection. I was stronger, more compassionate, and more willing to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be.